Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Sponsored once again by On Fire Ministries in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news, where it's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ. About not ending in prayer, but moving to action. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Father, deliver us from the evil one.
Welcome to Patriot Radio.
Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and today on Patriot Radio, the scourging of the Shire, and our guest today, Mark Sutherland, to talk about what is happening in England, and also the preaching of a false gospel and pleasing people. What does that mean, actually, for the globalists, and how is that being borne out? And then some very big announcements on the Russia front and on the national front that are impacting America and really are going to change it forever. Here at Patriot Radio, we want you to have all the information for you and your family to be prepared for the times that are ahead and the times that are already upon us. So follow us, patriotradio.us/Telegram, because preparedness takes the fear out of everything. And at Telegram, we post every day, aggregated across hundreds of sources, real-time intelligence analysis and breaking news on the events of the day. Also, you may hear some things today that spark you to prayer. We need to be praying for the UK and the United States. patriotradio.us/prayer. Please click on that and share with us your prayer requests. And that brings us now to your wisdom from the Word. I'm going to choose from Galatians chapter 1, verse 5. I am amazed that you are so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of Christ for a different gospel. Verse 6. Which is not just another account, but there are some who are disturbing you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. Then he continues in verse 10 asking this question: For am I now seeking the favor of people or of God? Am I striving to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. The idea here is that there is a false gospel being preached, and it is always along the lines of trying to please people. It is a gospel that wants a blessing without obedience, love without holiness, calling without submission. It is a gospel, God forbid, that preaches a king without a kingdom. It is a gospel that preaches grace without repentance, like I said, in addition to salvation without surrender. This is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is a gospel to please people. And today, we need to start speaking the truth. The church cannot be silent beyond the four walls anymore, because that silence is being and has been filled with that vacuum has been filled with the voice of those who want to destroy Western civilization and Christendom. And it's for all of us to stand up now and say, nope, we don't want that here. And here is the truth. That brings us now to your daily intelligence brief, coming to us from the globalist front.
The future is built by us. We have the means to make progress on the global agenda.
Power rates are going up. Some consumers in America will be receiving a power and water bill larger than their house payment. And the reason why is because of AI data centers and the scarcity of power, especially as we are scrambling to get nuclear power and small modular nuclear reactors, to be more specific, online. Trump very clearly the other day talking about how solar and wind is a waste of rare earth metals and a waste of time because it destabilizes the grid. Because when you need the power most, the wind's not blowing. When you need the power most, the sun's not shining. So with that said, there's going to be a huge shift here. And this is headed toward technocracy. And to underscore that point, one of the most disturbing pictures and ideas, I think, ever, how about pregnancy robots to give birth to human babies? Yes, artificial wombs. I don't think that's a great idea. I think there is something in this whole movement of the technocrats that is trying to take away an important component of humanity. Feeling pain, experiencing joy, discovering the truth. With AI, I'm beginning to see this. People are taking AI answers as truth, even though they're lying. And there's deception, and this has been built into some of these AI models. And some of the learning that's happened has been exposed as being intentionally deceitful. I remember a couple of years ago, some people tried to say, oh, there's an adoption center that is not registered and is not recognized. And I'm like, it says it right here on Open Corporates. Here's the paperwork. But Google says, I'm like, here's the paperwork. And they still couldn't grasp that Google had lied to them or was wrong. We need to be really careful that we get our truth from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And again, as I've harped on so many times on the show, go to the primary source documents and read them for yourselves. Also, technocracy is not communitarianism. That's what they're trying to call it now, communism, socialism, or even fascism. Technocrats want to shield their technocratic policies. That's why they're changing the language. But technocratic policy, smart cities, public health policy being super invasive in your life, cracking down on free speech, what you can even think, what your conscience can be. That's not all of us living together in harmony. That's dictatorship and slavery. We need to call it out for what it is. That brings us now to the China front. A U.S. Navy sailor was convicted of spying for China. The defendant was paid more than $12,000 by a Chinese intelligence officer, prosecutors said. Wei Jinchao, 25, who goes by Patrick Wei, was born in China, became a naturalized U.S. citizen in 2022. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 2021 as a machinist mate aboard the USS Essex, an amphibious assault ship homeported in Naval Base San Diego. He was arrested on espionage charges in August 2023, and then there was an indictment in February 2024. What this highlights is there needs to be better vetting of those who were born in countries that are declared adversaries of the United States of America. Also, China's spy agency sees risk in smart equipment imports. The vague warning echoes a longstanding U.S. complaint that the CCP's data collection efforts threaten American information security and intellectual property. So now the Chinese are also saying, hey, this could be happening to us too. Yeah, it's happening both ways. And all of these smart devices, quote unquote, yeah, they're intentionally collecting data. That's what smart is a euphemism for. And that data is being sold. That data is being imported into digital selves of all of us so that they think that they know you better than you know yourself. How about we just say no? A U.S. company is also putting up a fight against China's tariff evasions. Quote, we've been in business for 124 years, and you don't stay around that long if you're not determined and willing to fight and compete, an executive said. Vice president of a U.S. pipe company thought that relief was finally on the way when they won a trade case against China in 2018, but that ended up not being the case. And so companies, American manufacturing now is fighting to enforce a level playing field. And it's about time. The business community starts to weigh in like that. It's going to have a profound effect. Also, China's mega dam isn't needed for electricity, says hydrologist. Without the project, China would lose its hydroelectric crown to the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, where What would have been the world's largest dam is being built across the Congo. So this does seem to be a power play and also to control water. Also, China's rare earth shipments to the United States jumped after the trade truce. The United States received about 619 tons of magnets last month, a surge of up from 46 tons in May. And this is one of the reasons I think that this is going to be a start and stop game with China. The U.S. does need rare earth minerals to fill the gap between the time that we can spin up manufacturing here and find other sources across the world. Also, China said that it will show off new weapons at a military parade next month, potentially giving rivals like the U.S. a first chance to see what hardware the nation is ready to field. Why would they decide to do that now? I think this is covering for some weaknesses and in the internal factionalization inside the Chinese government, and also the economic downturn that is putting pressure on the Chinese Communist Party. China has also embarked on a rapid and sustained increase in the size and capability of its nuclear forces, according to the U.S. military and arms control experts. Again, trying to show strength to cover for the internal weaknesses that are tearing China apart. If we could bring up the next article as well, very important. U.S. Special Forces conducted a raid and took out a couple of ISIS leaders in Syria in the last 48, 72 hours. It looks like it might have been earlier than that. But the bottom line is that the United States is still going after the leadership of ISIS, and it is happening in Syria. And I suspect that's probably part of the deals that were struck with the current leader in Syria. Also, Hezbollah supporters accused Nawaf Salam of being an Israeli collaborator in a southern Lebanese area. A banner criticizing the prime minister was raised, reading, "A collaborator has no sect, no religion." These threats come amid Salam's pledge to disarm Hezbollah and Palestinian camps of their heavy weapons. So on the Middle East front, we are seeing a huge shift, a sea change in the Middle East, as the Christian coalition is beginning to realize in Lebanon the threat of Hezbollah. Also in Iran, Tehran experiencing a lot of things. One of them, Austria's embassy in Tehran, has suspended all consular services until further notice. And I wonder if this is a signal that there could be attacks again in the near term. Also, a major oil depot is on fire in Tehran. Dozens of suspicious fires and explosions have been registered in Iran since the end of the 12-day war. And it does appear the intelligence war is continuing there on the ground. Also, just an important point of clarification. The European pogroms, those were Jewish persecutions, often involving death, of the late 19th century, spurred early waves of Jewish migration back to Ottoman-controlled Palestine. So, Israel today was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. But remember, it was first Jewish until the breakout of the Islamic Empire from the Arabian Peninsula in 632. So during the first Aliyah, 1882 to 1903, around 25,000 Jews, mostly Eastern European, moved there. And you can read a fantastic thread on Visegrad 24 about this history of what spurred them to come back. And they began buying land. In fact, there was an attempt to outlaw the purchasing of land by Jews in that area because absentee Arab landlords began selling some of this property. So, with that said, let's understand the history there, and the order in which things happens matters, especially when we come to our guest today, Mark Sutherland. And when we come back after the break, some significant developments on the Russia front and an announcement on the national front that is going to change the face of America forever.
What if I told you you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's It's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And now we're back with the Russia front. Poland's really having a hard time dealing with continued drone incursions from Russia. Poland issues an official protest note to the Russian embassy in Warsaw after a Russian suicide drone struck Usyny, Poland, yesterday. Now, you can see the map of the flight path coming in. And even more interesting is this map of the flight path of Russian drones during the attack. You can see how they're coming in essentially from north-central Ukraine and then going across the entire Ukrainian countryside over to the west. And that's the border with Poland over on that side. So this flight path into the east of Poland, they're literally flying drones all the way across Ukraine. And of course, a strike on NATO soil has the potential of invoking Article 5 in the NATO treaty. Not saying that this is going to do that because it hasn't in the past, but this is becoming a continual issue as part of this conflict. And I wouldn't be surprised if this didn't get brought up as part of the negotiations for some sort of a peace deal. Also, Russia's oil refiner was hit by Ukrainian drones overnight as Ukrainians continue to attack the Russian oil industry. Again, accounting for about 50% of the Russian economy. That's why they are attacking it. Large black smoke plume visible for dozens of kilometers. And they're continuing to strike key nodes and infrastructure, and it is having an impact. Russia can withstand this, but that combined with India going away from Russian oil is enough, I think, that it brought Putin to the table. Now, recent orders from India seem to be turning back toward Russia, while there was a pause there for at least a couple months. Also, J.D. Vance said the U.S. has finally received details of Russia's and Ukraine's demands, and a peace agreement does not necessarily have to be fully prepared before a face-to-face meeting between Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky. According to Vance, the White House now has details to work with. He argued that the lion's share of responsibility for Ukraine's security guarantee should fall on Europe, while the U.S. will not commit until it is clear what exactly is required to end the conflict. And the U.S. has stated through many different channels that the United States would probably only do some sort of airlift or air security. Also, the United States and the European Union unveiled trade details capping tariffs and unlocking billions in energy and tech purchases. The deal caps U.S. tariffs at 15% on key EU exports, including cars, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals. So it looks like there will be a deal here in the short term. Also, Italian police have arrested a Ukrainian citizen suspected of orchestrating the 2022 Nord Stream pipeline explosions. We're going to keep our eyes on this because any trial there could potentially reveal connections to NATO countries that may have been a part of that as well. A very interesting post from Trump on the Russia-Ukraine war. It is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. Biden would not let Ukraine fight back, only defend. How did that work out? Yeah, indeed. Interesting times ahead, as Trump seems to be signaling that Ukraine could get some offensive capability if a peace deal does not go through. Also, we're going to be talking about this more with our guest today, Mark Sutherland. Operation Raise the Colors has visited the area near the controversial new migrant hotel in Canary Wharf, London. The English flag movement continues to spread across the country. So this is a critical moment in English history. And will it result in a civil war? We're going to talk about that more with our guest. But this movement is going to continue to grow in the near term as people are fed up with the attempt to replace English culture and Western civilization. A youth was arrested in Canada after planning a mass casualty attack for ISIS. Youth in Montreal was arrested for allegedly planning to carry out a major terrorist attack in Canada and was granted anonymity due to his age. Hughes was arrested on Wednesday afternoon after some 40 police officers descended on the scene. He did not resist. What about the attacks that are being planned that have not been thwarted? Well, that brings us now to the national front. The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet reports that a fire on board the San Antonio-class amphibious transport dock, USS New Orleans, has finally been declared extinguished after 12 hours of firefighting. Because we're now maneuvering in so many areas of the world, and there have been maintenance deferrals on some of these things, we're going to see this happen, which just underscores that there needs to be a complete overhaul in the maintenance and readiness of the U.S. Navy, and particularly with our ability not just to build ships, but to bring them into dry dock for significant maintenance. Not saying that's necessarily what started the fire. I just think this highlights the issue. Also, a senior CIA officer for 30 years confirms the psychological operations they use overseas were turned against President Donald Trump and the American people to keep the Democrats in power. An intelligence agent, now retired, very senior, he looked me in the eye and said, "The truth of the matter is, we took the playbook for psychological operations and information warfare that we would use against our enemies, and we turned it against the American people to undo the 2016 election and to make sure they didn't elect Donald Trump in the 2020 election." I know this word has been thrown around, but that is treason. To turn the military against the citizens, the intelligence community against the citizens, psychological operations to manipulate the citizens. So just so they could stay in power. There are investigations that are obviously going to come out of this. So we'll know more if these allegations prove true. This is going to be a very bumpy road as accountability comes to certain quarters in the United States of America, especially the fifth column in your community or mine. Appeals court tosses Trump's $500 million civil penalty in business fraud case. The judge said the penalty violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on excessive fines. Yeah, about time. So a huge win for President Trump. And on top of that, Kyle Scheidler talks about white privilege and some of the definitions of whiteness as part of a long-standing active measure. I mean, you guessed it. The communists popularized in the 1970s by Marxist terrorists. Very interesting that all of this is now kind of gaining traction with the awakening of the American people happening. And we need to understand that a lot of this cultural Marxism was an active measure intentionally made to destroy the United States of America and Western civilization. So, this isn't a oops or let's have a reasoned discussion. This stuff was intended to divide, subvert, and destroy. Also, regarding redistricting, the great state of Missouri is now in as President Trump rallies Missouri Republicans on redistricting efforts and then announces a big win in Texas on redistricting and says, quote, "We will pick up 100 more seats," end quote, if Republicans stop mail-in ballots and rigged machines. President Trump on Wednesday night cheered Texas Republicans for passing the highly consequential redistricting bill that is expected to give Republicans 5 more seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. Texas never lets us down. Florida, Indiana, and others are looking to do the same thing. More seats equals less crime, a great economy, and a strong Second Amendment. Very clearly said that as part of this. So expect these redistricting efforts to continue. States like California are going to attempt to do this. But in the end, those states do not have the ability to gerrymander because they've already done the gerrymandering. And in such a way to have enough seats to offset what the Republicans are doing, which is to get rid of apportionment fraud, where non-citizens were used in the census to apportion congressional seats. So they're not gerrymandering, they're resetting the maps to what they should be based on an actual census of U.S. citizens. Super important to remember. But the bottom line is that the Democrats do not have the bandwidth to match the patriots here in America that understand what has been happening. And then Trump makes the important point that if we take away mail-in voting as well, you're going to see a huge shift. And this is the shift that will change the way America looks as we know it. And it's happened before the end of August. For those of you that know what I'm talking about and have clued in, this is an important moment. Perhaps Wikipedia under fire right now, and perhaps they are going to change their tune. Many people complaining about Wikipedia because now they have editors who are removing the truth. For example, provable military awards being removed from Wikipedia. And then they're saying that there's bias by putting those military awards up. It's literally stolen valor, but from another side. You have stolen valor where people claim to have an award that they didn't earn. Well, now you've got people who actually earned an award that Wikipedia is taking down. I'm sure this is going to gain traction, and it should gain traction with veterans organizations across the United States very soon. President Trump plans to sign an executive order that would criminalize certain actions related to burning the American flag. And then Hillary Clinton predicts that the Supreme Court will overturn same-sex marriage. We're in bizarro world a little bit on that. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Also, in some bombshell news, Tulsi Gabbard announced plans to shrink the Office of the Director of National Intelligence by 40%, saving $700 million, and then putting that back into national intelligence priorities. She's doing a fantastic job there. Director Kash Patel announced a settlement with 10 FBI whistleblowers, including back pay, security clearances, and reinstatement, secured after years of retaliation from the deep state. Also, this September, Jerome Powell is looking at a rate cut, seeming to give into the pressure from President Trump. And lastly, on a sad note, Dr. James Dobson, author, evangelist, and founder of Focus on the Family, passed away at 89. A true hero of the faith. And that's the briefing. When we come back from the break, Mark Sutherland.
What if I told you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And we're back today with our guest, Mark Sutherland. We're talking about the things that are happening in England because just over the last 48 hours, it has gotten very spicy there. MarkSutherland.org. He's an author and a filmmaker. And always, we are glad to have you on Patriot Radio. Thanks for joining again, my friend.
Good to see you, my friend. Thank you, Matt.
So, this is not known by a lot of people, but The Lord of the Rings really is a history of Western civilization. I've said it on this show before. And in that, Tolkien was trying to warn Western civilization, and particularly aimed at Britain and America, warned them about dangerous ideologies, specifically the spread of communism, represented by the Balrog of Morgoth, and then also the spread of Islam, represented by the whole underpinning behind Saruman and Sauron. There is a scene specifically in there that is almost prophetic. In fact, it's not almost, it is prophetic. It's called The Scourging of the Shire. And upon returning, the hobbits, after winning the war outside, return. The hobbits, representing Christians, return to the Shire, and they realize that there is a usurper that is in charge of their Shire. And they also realize that Saruman's presence and influence has diminished the Shire to essentially a state of slavery for most of the hobbits that are there. And then lastly, that there is widespread destruction and they don't even recognize the place from which they came. Just as an outside observer, because you have commented on America many times, just looking in at England right now, it appears we are witnessing quite literally the scourging of the Shire. How are you analyzing this, especially with the events of the last 24, 48 hours?
Matt, no, thank you. So here we are. This is rather interesting. Your take on Lord of the Rings, I just find fascinating because I have always thought that Tolkien's interpretation there, one of his motivations was in regard to an attack on the Shire was the spread of the cities. And he was a man that was born, around the Midlands. However, I think your take on it is also fascinating because he's also someone that cared about his country's culture. And as you know, very, very good friend with C.S. Lewis's, and in fact, how I believe Tolkien became a Christian, which is through C.S. Lewis. So putting that this is a culture, a massive culture war. Many people would not even know. Maybe they know the Lord of the Rings film, but they wouldn't look at Tolkien as a writer. They may not look at C.S. Lewis as a writer and look at the Christian faith. We have had. There is a lead up to the flags. I want to give you something that's behind it that's very important. We have had in Epping, which is in Essex, which as you look at a map of England, it's to the right of London. So the East End of London, people moved out from that and made good is a phrase that I know the area very well that we would use. So there have been these migrant hotels that have been up and down the country. One of them at the Bell Hotel was then in Epping. Now, this then is in next door to a school, and these illegal, let's call them, they're illegal migrants that have come into this country, just for the record. We have seen, I think we're at something like, at this rate, maybe 50,000 illegals that have come over since the duration of this government, which were voted in on the 4th of July last year by 40% of people not voting. They definitely weren't voted in by me. So they are scorch of the earth, using that phrase, socialist, if not total Fabians, if not communists, if not at the same time, technocrats. This whole thing of that body of thinking all in one. So the Epping hotels that grew out to be protests up and down the country of hotels that have been taken over to house the illegal boat people that have been crossing over the channel in greater numbers day by day, especially when it's the summer and the weather's good, extensively. And the government is not doing anything about that in regard to the border. Let's just make a quick sarcastic comment. I understand it, why, but they're more concerned about the Ukrainian-Russia border situation than our own. So I'll just leave that one there. Now, from the hotel situation, Matt, there's now been a legal precedent where it's been said that this is wrong to house these illegal immigrants in this hotel in Epping. That court decision happened yesterday. That will have a ramification up and down this country. However, at the same time, as you quite rightly have pointed out, over the last 3-4 days has been people putting up the George flag, the George cross, the red cross. That is the England flag. That has been going up.
Yeah, could you explain that? Because most Americans are not going to know the difference between the Union Jack and the George flag. Yeah.
I do apologize. I don't know if I can grab this even though it's half a Union Jack, right?
Okay, the
but
bottom.
Here, the red cross is part of the Union Jack, right? That's part of it. So you are bringing the England flag. You are bringing then the Scottish flag. Remember, we are a union. We are the United Kingdom, which is Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and England. And because of the multicultural experiment, because of the constant accusations that the England flag, has been taken over by the far right. Well, I turn around to people and say, could you please tell me where the far right are in this country? If you are talking about real Nazis and real anti-Semites and that kind of behavior, I don't think we have that many of them, but that is what I would call the far right. And of course, they would not be as educated as us, sorry to say, when they say that you and I would go into history and then devolve even more on that subject. But the England flag is a red cross on a white background. Okay, thank you very much. So what you have then got is the combination of, and I'm just going to look at your wonderful diagram, absolutely explaining how the Union Jack then has been created. So we then have our Union flag. The Union flag is, of course, of the UK, bringing all, that is who we are. That's the flag of our nation. Now, specifically with the England flag, if we were playing a game of soccer, as you call it, we call it football. If we're playing a game of rugby, not American football, because we're much harder because we don't wear padding or helmets. But that's the whole thing. So people would be going to those crowds holding the England flag up, and Scots would be holding the Scottish flag up. But we have a situation in this country that people have felt for so long that if they start going around with the England flag, they'll then be called racist. There was a very classic situation by a Labour politician who's now a dame called Emma Thornberry, who denigrated what she called white van man, a tradesman who drives a white van, who most probably would be from Essex, hardworking, but he's proud of his English heritage. So he had all England flags all over his house, and she thought that this was, look down on this. So for many people, Matt, right now, with this whole thing of multiculturalism, this whole thing of the boat people coming over illegally, which everyone has had enough of, we are broke as a nation financially, and we see all these billions and billions of pounds going out, installing all these individuals in these hotels up and down the country. People have had enough, and it's a way of people actually expressing and saying, this is our country. We are an island, for crying out loud. We want you to sort this border out. We have asked previous governments, remember before the Labour government came in, the Conservatives were in power for 14 years, and they didn't sort this out. And I'll just end this section by saying, under Boris Johnson, Matt, we have seen, if not, it was like virtually up to 1 million, it looked like, illegal people coming over. We remember our country fits into Texas 2.5 times, and we can't cope with this infrastructure wise. It's the equivalent of a new city, say, nearly a bit like Birmingham every other few years. This can't go on. So the flag, I believe, I see what people are doing is great. The flag is a way of saying, this is our country, this is our culture, it's our identity. And going back to the Bale Hotel, this hotel was next door to a school. So when males are who are illegal immigrants coming over here are in the hotels, who are then luring at various girls, there has been a couple of incidents as well that have led to arrests. Absolutely appalling behavior. This is wrong. And then suddenly within this community, they just thought, well, hold on a minute, this is wrong. We're pushing back. Mm-hmm. So that's going on. It's all, Matt, it's all part of that, but there is a huge problem.
So, and I know I'm going to get challenged on a couple things, so I want to address those right now. I'm going to get challenged on the Lord of the Rings. Yes, he was talking about industrialization. But the Battle of Helm's Deep was very clearly the Battle of Covadonga in northern Spain, where a remnant of the Spanish army held out, and then it began what was known as the Reconquista, where they finally defeated the last vestiges of the Islamic armies in 1492. And you can actually read, and by the way, by degree and passion, I'm a historian. You can actually read the journal of Christopher Columbus of what King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella commissioned him to do, and that was to find a way in from the east to the Islamic Empire to defeat it once and for all. And so Tolkien and Lewis were coming out of World War I, where the Ottoman Caliphate had been allied with Germany, which is represented actually by Saruman and his army, and the Uruk-hai, and industrialization, ripping the trees down, etc. He had actually been they had been allied with Germany, and the Caliphate lost World War I, and the Caliphate was abolished in 1924, which gave rise to the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928. This is all a matter of historic fact. Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, actually said they wanted a reestablishment of the Caliphate. So with that said, the battle for the Great White Shining City in the Lord of the Rings was the battle for Constantinople. The historical parallels are very clear. So when I say this is an understanding of Christian history. And there's one last piece. There was a prophetic word in a book called Second Esdras, which was Apocrypha, about the rise of the dragon nations of Arabia. This was 200 AD. That Apocrypha was included in the 1611 version of the King James Bible. And in that, understanding the whole history of the church, when Islam came out of Arabia, they said this is a fulfillment of that prophecy. That's why it was included in King James Version of the Bible. And what we just saw was the St. George cross. And St. George is depicted with this picture, if we can bring that up right now, slaying the dragon. And in church history, because of that prophetic word, the dragon was always understood to be Islam. So this gives a context, a historical, accurate, truthful context of why that flag would also be offensive to the migrants that have come into England, and also why this movement is now spreading, especially the last 48 hours, across the UK. So with that said, when we come back from the break, we're going to talk more with Mark Sutherland about what this means for the future of the United Kingdom. And more importantly, at least for me personally and selfishly, what does that mean for the history and for the future of the United States?
What if I told you could convert your 401k or your IRA into gold? While your retirement is being beat up by a volatile stock market and inflation, it could instead be resting safely in physical gold at a place of your own choosing, including your own business. Look, gold has increased 50% in just the last year. Stock market, it's been nothing but a roller coaster. So protect your retirement from market chaos by calling Verity Metals today.
And we're back with our guest today, Mark Sutherland, marksutherland.org, filmmaker and author, talking about what is happening in England right now. Mark, I know this is a difficult subject for some because there's been such hatred thrown at people that have even brought this up. But if we can't talk about our own history, and we can't talk about our own context, and we can't talk about the understanding of 1,400 years of Christendom, then do we really have free speech anymore? So yes, we're broaching this subject. It is difficult, but what does this mean for the future of the United Kingdom? And do you think that this flag movement is going to get traction?
Well, first of all, I just want to commend you for that last few minutes of the first segment when you were addressing me with history of my own country, which in a way I'd never really thought about. I'm going to admit that and say that, because especially I am very aware of St. George and being an ex-scout and having parades of that on St. George's Day. This is important because we're seeing the undermining of our culture, right? And yes, America, yes, America, yes, America. Be warned, especially when our dear friends Robert Spencer and Trevor Loudon have just done a sit down in regard to American freedom and gone through that, and they're warning about certain towns that have been setting up within America as well. You are absolutely right, because the Overton window has moved in regard to the rape gangs, right? It has moved, even though I would say there's still some establishment hangout. And again, let's say it, if it wasn't for Tommy Robinson doing what he has done and exposing this for years and years with all that he has suffered, I believe firmly that we would not be at this point, and no one at all should take any credit away from him for what that guy incredibly has done. I'm not saying that as flattery. I'm just saying that is absolute fact. The problem is that our establishment doesn't want to face that and say it's down to other people. So this Overton window's begun to move on that, and then various people have been getting on the bandwagon with that. But we are starting to look at that uncomfortable subject, because it involves politics. It involves making sure that a certain people group would then vote for them. That is the way this is going. I think the other thing about the protest outside the hotel, it was done by mums, aunts, grandmothers. There was, in fact, and also within Canary Wharf, which is an extremely wealthy area, the banking system and all the rest. There's where the banks are, long history to explain about that. And also Canary Wharf and that area has a very proud history in regard to shipping, docks and all the rest. But again, there was another protest outside there by the ladies in pink. So this is pushing back. However, the caveat is this, and this is what we have now got to look for while everyone is celebrating, and so they should be, is that they will, instead of taking those people who are illegally in this country out of their hotels and immediately deporting them, they will then share them around this country in regard to the private homes that the councils have bought in the area, in the county areas they've bought, and then they will house these people in there, taking a valuable housing resource off the local people who, if they're on a council waiting list, they can't afford their own home, they're on a council waiting list to get a flat or to get a house. So it's all about resources, Matt. I think one of the hilarious but brilliant things, you don't have them in America, really. You don't have what we call roundabouts, where you come for a junction and you go round a circle in the road, and there's a number of junctions off that you would turn. So we have these miniature roundabouts in places. They are white so that cars can see where they are. And some amazing gentleman decided to paint red crosses on the white circle. I think it was in the Birmingham area. And the reason why this is important is because Birmingham has had a huge row over collecting rubbish. It can't collect the rubbish properly. There's been this big pile up. People had gone on strike and all the rest, but they can soon come out with a special machine to clean the paint off and to turn the roundabout back to white without the George Cross. And now they want to, there was talk, chatter, we'll just say it like that. They want to find the person who did that and prosecute them and all the rest. Absolutely stunningly brilliant. Then there's been memes, and maybe this has happened, where you could buy a black refuse sack with the George Cross on it, and then you could put all your rubbish in that and then put that out the door. So while you've been complaining that this council hasn't been picking up your refuse quickly, maybe they're about to, because they want to clear the George Cross off the streets. So this is how, in the wonderful, remember, we are the British humor, right?
That is British humor.
Are,
yeah.
I know, and I'm not advocating that we watch them, but I remember if we watch them, the Carry On films and all the rest. This is our heritage, right? We have an incredible humor, and which I think people are really, really finding. But the serious nature of this, Matt, is that we are now reaching the point when we have to have that difficult conversation in regard to multiculturalism along the way, and saying that the ideology that we are facing in regard to Islam, and when we look at history, and you quite rightly talk about northern Spain, you're talking about, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, my friend, we're talking about Catherine of Aragon's family, right, who then pushed back in northern Spain, and Catherine of Aragon went, and Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon. So it's how history has been rewritten. So in the Spanish situation, when they call them the Moors, actually they are an Islamic army. Why is it, as we look in the Bible, we look in the 7 letters to the churches, where are they? They are in Turkey. It's all in an Islamic country now. So what are you saying, Mark? Well, if you go back in history and then you realize that there were many Christians in Egypt with many churches. This is the whole thing, and we're not taught about this. We're not taught about the gates of Tours. We're not taught about that Battle of Vienna, etc. We're not taught about that. We're not taught about the Biafran Wars. Sorry, not Biafran, the Barbary Pirates.
Wars, yeah.
But yeah, we're not talking about that. We're not realizing that on the road to Tripoli, the American Marines, and having leather collars on their coats to stop the scimitars coming and cutting them, and the fact that I believe, the then president turning around and going, "Why are you attacking us?" Well, we have a book. It's called the Quran. You are the infidels. We're going to come against you. Now, as Robert Spencer and Trevor Loudon are pointing out recently, with the other wonderful gentleman, Gaffney, American Freedom, when they're talking about the ideology, and we have to address the ideology and what we have got, which is deeply, deeply concerning in this country. You and I have had these conversations partly before, and you're very much an expert on this. We are seeing a beginning of a repeat. When we look at Iran, we look at the red-green axis. We see that playing out. We look at what happened in Lebanon, slightly different, but of course, as the great Bridget Gabriel talks about, that there was a civil war. It came out of the fact that Lebanon was saying, "Look, you're a refugee. Keep coming in. Keep coming in." Then it switched in regard to when you've got a certain number of people that follow Islam in your country. It is unrelenting. Now, the thing is, we have to have a mature discussion about this, because we want all these Muslims to come to Christ. That is, there is only one God.
That's
we
right.
want them to know Jesus as their Lord and Savior. The ideology of Islam means submission. And what's happening, Matt, is that certain people are beginning to educate themselves about that. People have gone on about it for a long time. But I will also say that within our society, within our news, within our media, my friend, it has been so pushed that you have thought you can't really address this.
Yep.
And the rape gangs, from a mainly, when you look at this, their background is of a Pakistani origin, then that has to be addressed and spoken about, because there has been legal cases. These people have been sent to jail. You can't deny that, Matt. But the warning to America, this is what has started to come to your country in a major way. And sorry, the situation in Israel from the 7th of October
That's right.
has absolutely ramped up, and the Qatarian propaganda machine has gone into overdrive.
So we've got about 2 minutes left, and I think I would be really remiss if I didn't bring this up quickly. Tommy Robinson is going to have a huge rally, as I'm understanding it, in London coming up in September. And it seems like this is really gaining traction. Do you think this is going to be an inflection point for the UK? And I mean, he's saying tens of thousands of people showing up there. What do you think?
There'll be a lot of people turning up. Will this be an inflection point? It could be. However, the authorities, they won't back down. They won't back down. This government has got, sadly, 4 years within our political system to run yet before there's another election. All I can say is, I will say this is the biggest spiritual battle of our lifetime. There are not enough Christians who understand this in here or in this country, I'll say it boldly, or even care. And we need to be praying about this, because this is the only thing that will turn around if God is going to give us that space. Because I passionately believe that we are in the season of Jesus's return. I'm not a date setter, but could this be an inflection point? Yes, people are talking about faith. They are talking about the culture of this country that they're very proud in. So we wait and see, Matt.
Well, I pray that the United Kingdom, in the name of Jesus, would awaken, that their hearts would be opened to the one true and living God. Amen. So, Mark Sutherland, thank you for joining me on Patriot Radio today. Really, really important topic, really timely. And thank you for taking a kind of a late night right now for you to come on and tell us what's really happening there. Blessings to you, and keep up the fight. Mark Sutherland, marksutherland.org. Check it out. And what you can do, go do some of the research. Check out chapter 15 of 2nd Esdras. See for yourself what it says. Read the church history, that it was written sometime 200 AD is probably a late dating. It probably was written earlier, but either way, it was written before 632 and the rise of Islam in Saudi Arabia. Secondly, you can read the history about St. George. It's out there very clearly. In fact, there's an order of St. George and many other things, even here in the United States, recognizing the history of St. George and that iconic picture of him slaying the dragon. So don't just take our word for it. Go check it out for yourself. But if this is the history, and what I'm saying is very accurate, which it is, and that has some implications for the defense of Western culture and the defense of Christendom. And are we going to have an open and honest conversation about this, or is it always going to be a conversation where one side is calling the other names, and that we're almost reverting to pre-1917? This is Matt Shea. Thank you for joining me on Patriot Radio. May God bless all of you. He is making this generation the greatest one. The awakening is here, so keep up the fight.